The backcountry expedition was meant to be a testament to the group's experience and camaraderie. They had planned every detail meticulously, from the ski routes to the weather patterns. 5 seasoned skiers set out into the rugged wilderness of British Columbia, seeking untouched powder and the serene isolation that only the backcountry could offer. For years they had done this, gliding down steep, unmarked trails, weaving through thick forests, and embracing the biting cold as they carved their paths down snow-covered mountains. But this time, fate had other plans. As the group descended from a ridgeline, their leader, a seasoned skier named Liam, slowed down, guiding the others through a section of trees. The terrain here was steep, with deep snowbanks accumulated from recent storms. The skiers expertly zigzagged down the slope, but their movement disturbed the quiet harmony of the wilderness. Unbeknownst to them, beneath the thick blanket of snow lay a hidden threat, one they would soon regret awakening. Grizzly bears, normally dormant during this time of year, can occasionally stir from hibernation if their dens are disrupted, or if temperatures fluctuate enough to disturb their deep slumber. The group skied past an area where a massive grizzly had made its den, tucked away beneath layers of snow and debris. With every swoosh of their skis, the vibrations penetrated the earth, reverberating through the snowpack. It happened suddenly. The snow shifted and a massive shape stirred from the depths. The bear, groggy and disoriented from its long hibernation, felt the intrusion. Its instincts, still sharp despite months of dormancy, took over. The scent of humans filled its nose, triggering a surge of confusion and hunger. Emerging from the den, the grizzly, a colossal beast with matted fur and claws the size of daggers, was startled by the presence of the skiers. The bear's eyes, bloodshot and wild, locked onto the nearest skier, Derek, who had unknowingly skied too close. In a matter of seconds, the once peaceful mountainside erupted into chaos. The bear charged, its powerful limbs breaking through the deep snow with terrifying ease. The skiers, momentarily stunned by the sight, reacted too slowly. Derek turned to see the grizzly barreling towards him, its massive form cutting through the snow like a freight train. Panic set in, but there was no time to flee. Liam shouted to the others, motioning for them to spread out. But Derek was already in the bear's path. The grizzly slammed into him with full force, knocking him to the ground like a rag doll. He hit the snow hard. The wind knocked out of him as the bear's claws raked across his back. Blood stained the pristine snow as Derek let out a strangled cry, his body convulsing under the weight of the bear. The others sprang into action, their survival instincts taking over. 2 skiers fumbled for their bear spray while another brandished his ski pole, hoping to distract the bear. The grizzly, however, was locked in a frenzy, its confusion amplifying its aggression. Its claws ripped into Derek's jacket, tearing through layers of fabric and flesh. The sound of the attack was a brutal symphony, growls, gasps, and the sickening thud of the bear's paws against human flesh. Liam advanced toward the bear, shaking his can of bear spray with trembling hands. In a desperate move, he discharged the spray, a cloud of irritant chemicals bursting into the air. The mist caught the wind and wafted towards the bear's face. The bear snarled in irritation, shaking its massive head as the spray took effect. For a moment, the beast hesitated, its eyes watering from the burning sensation. But Derek was in bad shape. His body lay crumpled in the snow, blood pooling beneath him. His breaths were shallow, the pain overwhelming him as his vision blurred. The bear, now more enraged than ever, turned to face the other skiers. One of them thrust his ski pole forward, jabbing it towards the bear's snout. The bear batted it away with ease, nearly snapping the pole in two with the force of its paw. Realizing the bear was still too close, the group continued their assault. More bear spray was unleashed, and the skiers waved their poles frantically, trying to keep the bear at bay. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the grizzly recoiled, shaking its head violently as the burning chemicals overwhelmed its senses. With a final guttural growl, the bear retreated, disappearing back into the trees from where it had come. The mountain was silent, broken only by the labored breathing of the group and Derek's soft whimpers. The once pristine snow was now stained with his blood, painting a grim picture. Time was critical. Though the bear had vanished, they knew it could return at any moment. Liam knelt beside Derek, assessing his injuries. Deep gashes crisscrossed his back and arms, his jacket torn to shreds. Blood seeped into the snow. He was alive, but barely, each breath a struggle. With no quick rescue possible in this remote area, they fashioned a makeshift stretcher from their skis, securing Derek as best they could. The group began their slow descent through deep snowdrifts and treacherous slopes, each step a reminder of the lurking danger. Every gust of wind sent their hearts racing, and they feared the bear might return. Hours passed, and as the sun dipped low, they finally reached an area with enough signal to call for help. Derek's condition had worsened. His breathing grew shallow and his skin turned pale. Huddled together, exhausted and shaken, they awaited rescue. The wilderness had transformed from a playground into a stark reminder of nature's unforgiving reality. The Wilson family's annual camping trip to a park in Montana had always been a cherished tradition. The beauty of the untamed wilderness, the crackling campfires, and the quiet serenity of nature under the stars brought peace and a sense of connection to John and Mary Wilson and their two young children, Emily and Jacob. This year, they had chosen a particularly remote campsite, nestled deep in the park, hoping to escape the crowds and reconnect with the wild landscapes they loved. That evening, the campsite was lively with laughter as the family roasted marshmallows over the fire, exchanging stories of past trips. As the evening deepened and the fire dimmed, the children grew drowsy and climbed into their sleeping bags while John carefully doused the remaining embers of the fire. The night was still and silent as the Wilsons retreated into their tent. The soft rustle of the forest was all they could hear as they slipped into sleep. Unbeknownst to them, an ominous presence lingered in the forest nearby. A black bear, conditioned by previous campers who had carelessly left food out, had grown bold and unafraid of humans. This particular bear had learned that campsites often meant easy meals, and it was now emboldened, drawn by the faint scent of food from the Wilson site. The bear moved with eerie quietness, its dark form blending into the pitch black of the forest night, snuffling the air for any trace of sustenance. It had approached other campsites earlier that week, stealing unattended food with no natural consequence. Tonight, the scent of food wafted from the Wilsons' site. Though they had stored most of their food correctly, a few overlooked scraps were enough to pique the bear's interest. Slowly it advanced, eyes glinting in the faint moonlight. The scent led the bear directly to the family's tent. Inside the tent, all was peaceful. Mary stirred slightly in her sleep, unaware of the approaching danger. The children lay soundly in their sleeping bags between their parents, insulated by the tent's thin fabric. It wasn't until the faintest sound of something brushing against the outside of the tent reached John's ears that he stirred. He opened his eyes, heart thudding for no particular reason at first. Something was different. He lay still for a moment, straining to hear in the darkness. Then it came again, a soft, deliberate scratching sound like claws against the fabric. John's breath caught in his throat, the sound unfamiliar and out of place. Before he could react, a low grunt rumbled just beyond the tent flap. Suddenly, the tent's fabric ripped with a sharp, violent tear, and the bear's massive head pushed through the gap. John shot upright, grabbing at his wife's arm. Mary jolted awake, eyes wide in the darkness. The children stirred, disoriented and confused by the commotion. But there was no time to process the situation as the bear lunged further into the tent. In the chaos, John scrambled to shield the children, his instincts screaming to protect them at all costs. He pushed them toward the farthest corner of the tent, but there was no real escape. The bear's powerful claws swiped at the fabric, shredding it further. Its breath was hot and rank, filling the space with a terrifying proximity. Mary's hands frantically fumbled for anything to use as a barrier, grabbing the nearest objects, blankets, sleeping bags, whatever might deter the animal. But the bear, driven by hunger and without fear, batted them aside with ease. Its massive body pressed into the tent, collapsing it further around them, the weight of the bear threatening to crush them. John reached for a flashlight, desperately shining it into the bear's eyes, hoping to disorient it. For a moment, the bright beam seemed to give the bear pause, but only for a heartbeat. It swatted the light out of his hand, sending it spinning into the darkness. The tent was now a chaotic flurry of thrashing limbs and guttural growls, the bear tearing at whatever it could reach, relentless in its search for food. Outside, the commotion had drawn the attention of nearby campers. Faint calls echoed through the night as people began to realize what was happening. Some grabbed flashlights and ran toward the Wilsons' campsite. Others yelled in panic, unsure of how to help. Inside the collapsing tent, Mary's heart pounded in her chest. She clung to Jacob, her youngest, shielding him with her body, while John did his best to fend off the bear with nothing more than his bare hands and a camping chair he had managed to grab. The bear growled in frustration, its claws raking through the fabric, inches away from John's arm. The nearby campers arrived, flashlights swinging wildly in the dark, illuminating the terrifying scene. Some carried pots and pans, banging them loudly to scare the bear off, but it only seemed to enrage the animal further. A man wielding a large stick approached cautiously, but the bear turned on him with a ferocious snarl, causing him to backpedal quickly. In the chaos, someone threw a rock at the bear, striking it on the side. The animal growled deeply, hesitating for a brief moment as the barrage of noise and movement confused it. But its hunger overpowered its fear, and it returned to its task, clawing and biting at the remnants of the tent, determined to get inside. John, now bleeding from a shallow gash on his arm, fought to keep the bear at bay, but his strength was waning. The tent was all but destroyed, and the bear was closing in on his family. In a last desperate attempt, he grabbed a can of bear spray from his pack, fumbled with the cap, and unleashed it directly into the bear's face. The bear roared in surprise, rearing back as the spray hit its eyes and nose, burning with intensity. Disoriented by the attack, it shook its massive head and retreated several steps. The campers, seeing the bear's reaction, intensified their efforts, making more noise, waving their flashlights wildly and throwing whatever they could find. Finally, the bear backed away, still growling but now blinded and confused by the bear spray. It retreated into the woods, its massive form disappearing into the darkness from which it had come. The Wilsons, battered and shaken, emerged from the wreckage of their tent, clinging to one another in disbelief. The other campers rushed to their aid, their faces pale in the moonlight, some trembling with adrenaline. John and Mary, their hearts still racing, could barely comprehend what had just happened. They had survived the attack, but the memory of the bear's furious claws and the close call to death would haunt them for years to come. Crisp Alaskan air enveloped Mike and Dave as they waded into the salmon stream, their annual fly fishing trip in full swing. Best friends for years, they sought peace in this remote wilderness, far from the noise of daily life. Working in harmony, they cast their lines and watched the salmon flash beneath the surface. Mike stood a few yards upstream, focused on the rhythm of his rod and the rush of water around his waders. Meanwhile, Dave scanned the bank, admiring the wild beauty of their surroundings. The soothing sound of rushing water and the occasional splash of fish created a serene atmosphere. Suddenly, that tranquility shattered. A brown bear emerged from the tree line, blending into the shadows until it was mere feet from the stream. Startled, Mike locked eyes with the massive predator. Fear surged through him as the bear let out a low growl, a sound that silenced the wilderness. Before Mike could react, the bear lunged, its enormous paws cutting through the water. He stumbled backward, his fishing rod tumbling into the stream, but it was too late. The bear's claws hooked into Mike's jacket, dragging him into the freezing water. Shock set in as the icy current hit him like a wall. The bear's weight bore down on him, water churning violently around them. Desperately, Mike kicked to free himself, but the bear's grip was too firm. His vision blurred, and cold water filled his mouth as he struggled to stay afloat. Dave stood frozen, heart racing as he watched his best friend disappear beneath the thrashing bear. His fly rod felt useless against the creature. Instinct screamed for him to flee, but a deeper resolve compelled him to stay and help Mike. He couldn't abandon his friend in the jaws of danger. The bear, now fully submerged in the stream with Mike trapped beneath its bulk, seemed momentarily distracted by the tumult of water and thrashing limbs. Dave sprinted along the bank, his boots splashing through the shallow edges of the stream as he frantically searched for anything he could use as a weapon. The trees were too far to reach without losing sight of Mike, and there was nothing but rocks and water around him. Mike's struggles grew weaker as the freezing water sapped the strength from his limbs. Every time he surfaced, the bear's powerful jaws or claws forced him back down. His chest burned with the effort of trying to breathe, and his vision narrowed to a blur of brown fur, rushing water, and the cold, clear blue sky above. The cold had turned his movement sluggish, his body no longer responding to the frantic commands from his mind. Dave spotted a thick branch lodged in the rocky bank and snatched it up. It was heavy but sturdy, better than nothing. Without hesitation, he ran downstream to where the bear had dragged Mike, now wrestling in the deeper part of the current. The icy water lapped at Dave's legs as he waded in, brandishing the branch like a spear. His breath came in ragged gasps, more from fear than exertion. The bear, still focused on Mike, didn't see Dave approaching from the side. With every ounce of strength he had, Dave swung the branch toward the bear's head, the force of the blow jarring his arms. The bear roared in pain and surprise, jerking its massive body toward Dave, releasing its grip on Mike for a split second. The water exploded around them as the animal reared back, its enormous body casting a shadow over Dave. For a moment, time seemed to slow. Dave felt the bear's eyes on him, its dark gaze filled with primal rage. He knew he couldn't outrun it. The weight of the branch suddenly felt insignificant against the sheer power of the bear, but there was no time to think, only to act. He swung again, aiming for the bear's muzzle this time. The branch cracked against bone, sending the bear into a frenzy. It roared and lunged toward Dave, but the water slowed its movements, the current working in his favor. Mike, weakened and gasping for air, floated downstream, limp and pale against the dark water. Dave's mind raced as he backed away, trying to keep the bear's attention on him while inching toward the bank. His muscles screamed in protest, the cold water numbing his legs. He had to keep moving, had to find a way to keep the bear away from Mike, who was now drifting dangerously close to the rapids downstream. Suddenly the bear turned, its massive body crashing through the water toward Mike, who was helplessly floating toward the rocks. Dave's heart seized. He sprinted along the bank, barely keeping pace with the bear as it pursued Mike downstream. The current grew stronger, pulling Mike faster. The bear, still enraged, struggled to keep up, its focus split between Dave and the helpless man. With a burst of desperation, Dave spotted a large rock near the bank. He hoisted it above his head and hurled it at the bear's flank. The rock struck true, sending the bear crashing aside. That moment of distraction was enough. Mike, barely conscious, slipped out of reach as the current dragged him further toward calmer waters. Dazed, the bear finally gave up the chase, retreating into the forest. Dave watched in a mix of horror and relief as it disappeared, leaving him panting on the bank. Without hesitation, Dave plunged into the icy stream, rushing to where Mike lay motionless in a shallow pool. It was clear he had succumbed to hypothermia. Dave quickly lifted him from the water, pressing against his chest to expel excess water before slinging him over his shoulder. Navigating the slippery banks, each step was a battle against the cold. After what felt like hours, the outline of a cabin appeared. Summoning his strength, Dave called for help. A couple of hikers rushed to assist, laying Mike by the fireplace and wrapping him in blankets. As the warmth returned, Mike's eyes fluttered open, and they exchanged a glance, two friends forever bonded by their ordeal. On August 12, 2024, the Martinez family was enjoying their annual camping trip in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. For years, Michael and his wife Laura had brought their two children, Sophia, age 12, and their younger son, Ethan, aged 9, to explore the beauty of Yellowstone. They loved the outdoors, and these trips were a tradition the whole family looked forward to. Michael, a teacher, and Laura, a nurse, had always taught their children about the importance of nature and respecting wildlife. This trip was supposed to be like any other, filled with hiking, campfires, and stargazing. The family had set up camp near one of the more remote areas of the park, surrounded by tall trees and open fields. They spent the day hiking and enjoying the sights, marveling at the beauty of Yellowstone's natural landscapes. Sophia, the adventurous one, was always eager to explore. She loved animals and had a special interest in wildlife, often reading books about the animals that roamed the park. Michael and Laura, knowing the risks of camping in bear country, had reminded the kids about the importance of staying close and being cautious. But even with all the precautions, nature had its plans. Later in the afternoon, while Michael and Laura were setting up the campsite for the evening, Sophia wandered off a little too far from the tent. She had only meant to take a short walk to gather wildflowers, but she soon found herself deeper in the woods than she had intended. As she bent down to pick some flowers, a rustling sound nearby caught her attention. When she looked up, her heart froze. Just a few feet away stood a large black bear, accompanied by her cubs. Sophia knew enough about wildlife to understand that a mother bear with cubs was one of the most dangerous situations to be in. The bear, sensing Sophia's presence, turned sharply, her eyes locking onto the young girl. In an instant, the bear perceived a threat to her cubs and without hesitation charged at Sophia. Panic set in as the massive animal moved with surprising speed through the trees. Sophia screamed and ran, her instincts taking over as she sprinted back toward the campsite. Hearing her cries, Michael dropped everything and rushed toward his daughter. In the seconds that followed, Michael reached Sophia just as the bear was closing in. Without thinking about his own safety, he threw himself between his daughter and the bear, his heart racing. The bear, now focused on Michael, roared and swung its large paws at him. The force of the blow knocked Michael to the ground. His body crumpled under the weight of the impact, but his mind was only on one thing: protecting his family. Michael yelled for Laura to take the children and run, his voice filled with urgency. Sophia stood frozen in shock, watching as her father faced the enraged bear. Michael, bruised and bleeding, tried to keep the bear's attention on him, as Laura quickly grabbed Ethan and pulled Sophia to safety. Michael lay on the ground, his body aching from the force of the bear's attack. The bear, now fully focused on him, growled as it stood over him. Michael knew he had to keep the animal distracted to give his family enough time to get away. He tried to move, but the pain from the bear's initial strike made it difficult. His mind was racing, searching for anything he could do to survive the attack and protect his family. The bear, sensing no further threat to its cubs, hesitated for a moment. This brief pause gave Michael just enough time to inch backward, putting a small bit of distance between him and the enormous animal. The bear remained tense, watching his every movement, but it didn't move forward. Its maternal instinct to protect its cubs had been triggered, and now it was trying to decide if the danger had passed. At the same time, other campers nearby had heard the commotion. Some had already contacted the park rangers, alerting them to the situation. Rangers were dispatched immediately, making their way through the dense forest toward the scene, knowing how critical each second was. They carried equipment specifically designed for bear encounters, including bear spray and noise-making devices to deter the animal without harming it. Back at the campsite, Laura had managed to pull both Sophia and Ethan safely behind a large tree. They could still see Michael from a distance, and Sophia was trembling as she watched her father continue to face the bear. Every second felt like an hour as they waited for the rangers to arrive, hoping that the bear would retreat before any more harm could come to him. The bear, still on edge but no longer as aggressive, took a few steps back. Its cubs, now closer to their mother, began moving deeper into the woods. The bear followed them, slowly retreating into the forest. Michael stayed as still as possible, his body aching from the injuries, but his relief grew as the bear finally disappeared from view. He waited a few moments longer, ensuring that the bear had left, before he tried to stand. As he struggled to his feet, the park rangers arrived, moving quickly to assess the situation. Michael, pale and weakened from the encounter, was immediately assisted by the rangers. They applied first aid to his injuries and reassured the family that the bear had retreated safely. Laura and the kids rushed to his side, shaken but relieved to see that he had survived. The aftermath of the attack left a lasting impact on the Martinez family. Michael's injuries required weeks of recovery, and although he healed physically, the memory of the bear encounter stayed with him. On July 22, 2015, Dave Pearson, an experienced animal control officer in Boulder, Colorado, was preparing for what seemed like a routine call. At 45 years old, Dave had spent over 2 decades dealing with wildlife encounters in the region. He had relocated raccoons, caught stray dogs, and even managed the occasional coyote sighting. But recently the calls have become more frequent and concerning. Climate change and habitat destruction were pushing wild animals, especially bears, closer to human settlements. Dave knew that managing these situations required patience, skill, and an understanding of the animals he was dealing with. That summer, reports started coming in about a young black bear that had wandered into the suburbs of Boulder. At first, the bear's presence was a novelty. Locals spotted it raiding trash cans and wandering through backyards, and many people took pictures and shared them on social media. But as the bear grew bolder, the situation quickly turned dangerous. The bear, driven by hunger and easy access to food, started coming closer to homes and even entering fenced yards. Small pets disappeared, and parents began worrying about their children's safety. Dave knew this was no longer just a minor issue, it was becoming a serious threat. By mid-July, the bear had been spotted multiple times in residential areas, and Dave had been called in to manage the situation. His job was to relocate the bear safely without harming it or causing panic. He had handled bear relocations before, but each situation was different, and Dave was aware that a scared bear could be unpredictable. That morning, Dave and his team set out to capture the bear and relocate it to a safer area. They had set up a large cage trap on the outskirts of town, near where the bear had been spotted most recently. Dave had a deep respect for animals and wanted to ensure the bear was unharmed, but he also knew the risks involved. A wild animal cornered in a suburban environment surrounded by unfamiliar sounds and smells could easily become dangerous. As the day wore on, the bear was spotted near a row of houses, digging through trash cans. Dave and his team quickly arrived at the scene, hoping to capture the bear before it got too close to any people. However, things didn't go as planned. The bear, sensing danger, moved further into the neighborhood. It had been calm at first, but as the team approached, it became clear that the bear was frightened. Dave attempted to guide the bear toward the trap, but the young animal, now cornered in a small yard, panicked. It let out a low growl, its eyes wide with fear as it realized there was no escape. The bear charged at the fence looking for a way out, but found itself blocked by both the team and the structure around it. Dave moved forward slowly, trying to keep the bear calm, but the animal, confused and scared, lashed out. The powerful swipe of its paw hit the nearby fence, sending a loud crash through the quiet neighborhood. The bear's sudden outburst startled everyone in the yard. The fence rattled loudly as the bear swiped at it again, its strength evident in the way the wood splintered under the force of its paw. Dave Pearson, still trying to remain calm, knew the situation had escalated beyond control. The bear was trapped, frightened, and now dangerous. The team had to act fast before anyone got hurt. The bear, realizing it was cornered, turned its attention toward the team. It began pacing back and forth, its muscles tense and ready to strike. The nearby residents, who had initially been watching from their windows, began to panic. A few people rushed out of their homes, trying to pull their children inside, while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Dave, who had seen bears react this way before, knew that the animal was acting out of fear, not aggression. But fear could make an animal unpredictable, and in this suburban setting, the consequences could be severe. He carefully stepped back, signaling to his team to give the bear more space. However, the bear, still agitated, charged toward the nearest fence again, this time breaking through part of it. The loud crash sent more residents into a panic, and the bear, now free from the yard but still cornered in the street, looked more disoriented than ever. Dave knew they had no choice but to attempt to subdue the bear with a tranquilizer dart. The goal was always to capture the animal safely, but now, with the bear so close to residents, the risk of injury was too high to wait any longer. Dave quickly loaded the tranquilizer gun, aiming carefully at the bear's side. The dart flew straight, hitting the bear just below its shoulder. The animal roared in pain, startled by the sudden prick, and began pacing even more frantically. Dave knew it would take several minutes for the tranquilizer to take effect, but those minutes felt like hours. The bear continued moving toward the nearby houses, its strength still on full display. As the tranquilizer slowly began to work, the bear's movements became sluggish. It stumbled and let out a deep, tired growl before collapsing onto the ground near a driveway. The bear lay there, breathing heavily as the tranquilizer finally took full effect. The tension in the air slowly lifted as the danger passed, and the team moved in cautiously to secure the bear for transport. Once the bear was sedated and safely loaded into the transport vehicle, Dave took a moment to breathe. The situation had been far more chaotic than he had hoped, but no one had been injured, and the bear was still alive. The plan was to relocate the bear to a safer area, deep in the wilderness, where it wouldn't pose a threat to people or itself. For Dave, the encounter left a lasting mark. He knew the bear hadn't meant any harm. Still, the fear and confusion caused by the encroachment of human development into wildlife habitats had pushed the animals into a dangerous situation. Elena Volkov was a photographer who lived for the thrill of the wild, and Kamchatka's rugged wilderness offered exactly the challenge she craved. She had traveled across the globe, capturing the intimate moments of nature's fiercest animals, from the Serengeti's lions to the Arctic's polar bears. Yet it was Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula that had drawn her in with its raw beauty and its elusive brown bears, particularly the protective mothers and their cubs. She sought an image that captured not just a bear, but the emotion of its existence, the bond between mother and cub. The remote peninsula had an almost otherworldly quality, with its dense forests, rushing rivers, and looming volcanoes. Few ventured this far from civilization, and even fewer had the expertise to get close to the brown bears that roamed these lands. Elena had brought along an experienced local guide, Sergei, a grizzled man who knew these bears like few others. He was cautious, perhaps overly so in Elena's eyes. The bears, after all, were creatures of habit, predictable in their rhythms as long as one respected their space. They had spent days tracking a female brown bear and her 2 cubs, following from a safe distance as she fished along a riverbank and led her cubs through the wilderness. Elena had taken hundreds of photos, each one closer to the perfection she sought, but still missing that elusive spark. The bears moved through a low valley surrounded by thick forest, and from a ridge above, Elena caught a glimpse of something special. The mother bear had paused in a clearing, her cubs playfully wrestling beside her. The afternoon sun filtered through the trees, casting the scene in a golden glow. It was perfect, but it wasn't close enough. Sergei warned her to stay back. He had seen this before. Photographers, eager for the perfect shot, forgetting the genuine danger that lay between them and their subjects. Elena, however, felt the moment calling to her. She reassured herself that she knew the limits and that her years of experience would guide her. Carefully, she descended from the ridge, edging through the thick brush that led down into the valley. The terrain was uneven, and the foliage made it difficult to see clearly. But she pressed on, her camera ready in hand. Her breath quickened as she closed the gap. She knew she was closer than Sergei would ever allow, but the shot was worth it. The mother bear had lifted her head, sniffing the air, her eyes scanning the horizon. Elena crouched low, trying to appear as small and non-threatening as possible. She aimed her camera, framing the perfect shot of the mother's watchful gaze juxtaposed with the innocence of her cubs. Suddenly, the mother bear's posture shifted. Her head turned sharply in Elena's direction, her body tensing as she perceived an intruder too close for comfort. Elena froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized just how much danger she had put herself in. The bear's eyes locked onto her, and in that instant, there was no mistaking the animal's intentions. Elena had crossed a line. The charge came swiftly. There was no growl, no warning, just the sudden explosive motion of the bear lunging toward her. Elena's instinct screamed at her to retreat, but the ground beneath her was treacherous. Her boots slipped on the damp moss and she stumbled, her legs failing to find traction on the uneven terrain. The camera, which had been her lifeline moments ago, now felt like a dead weight in her hands. She tried to scramble backward, her limbs heavy with panic. The world around her seemed to blur as the mother bear closed the distance with terrifying speed. Elena's legs gave way beneath her and she collapsed to the ground, a sharp rock jutting into her back as she landed. She felt a surge of pain shoot through her, but it was nothing compared to the terror of seeing the bear's massive form looming above her. In the fraction of a second before the attack, Elena locked eyes with the bear. The mother was no longer just an animal. She was a force of nature, a protector, and Elena had made the fatal mistake of becoming a perceived threat. The bear's paw, powerful and heavy, swung down with a force that Elena could hardly comprehend. She tried to shield herself, raising her arms in a futile gesture, but the impact was brutal. The bear's claws ripped through her jacket, slicing into her skin with ease. Elena felt the sharp, burning pain spread across her body as the swipe connected. Her vision blurred, and she struggled to breathe. The weight of the animal pressed down on her, as if the very earth had risen to crush her. Her thoughts were disjointed and scattered as her mind fought against the overwhelming pain and fear. Through the haze of agony, she could hear Sergei's voice in the distance, shouting, though the words were lost in the chaos. She barely registered the sound of the bear's low growl. A warning meant not for her, but for the unseen threat she had become in the bear's eyes. Sergei was close now, but Elena's body was shutting down, her strength ebbing away as blood pooled beneath her, soaking into the forest floor. The bear, perhaps sensing Sergei's approach or simply deciding she had done enough, relented. With a final snort, she turned and lumbered back toward her cubs, her protective instincts still in overdrive. Elena lay motionless on the ground, the remnants of her camera shattered beside her, blood staining the lenses. Sergei rushed to her side, breathless and pale with fear. The first aid kit he carried seemed woefully inadequate against the wounds she had suffered. He managed to drive the bear away using flares and shouts to ensure the mother wouldn't return, but the damage had been done. Elena was barely conscious, her breath shallow and ragged. The remote wilderness that had once been her playground had now become her prison. Sergei knew that help was hours, maybe even a day away, and with each passing moment, Elena's chance of survival slipped further from reach. Sarah Chen was no stranger to the rugged trails of the Alaska wilderness. An experienced trail runner, she had spent countless hours exploring the pristine wilderness, reveling in the solitude that only the untamed beauty of nature could offer. Today was no different. The morning light was breaking through the thick canopy of trees as she ran along the dirt path, her breathing steady and her mind focused. As she rounded a bend in the trail, the air suddenly felt different. A heaviness settled around her, and the usual rustling of small creatures and birds seemed to pause. The hairs on the back of her neck prickled as a deep instinctual fear took root. She slowed her pace, her senses now on high alert, and then she saw it. Just ahead, in the tall grass by the trail, was a grizzly bear with 2 cubs. The massive mother was grazing while her cubs played nearby, their tiny frames a stark contrast to the bulk of their protective parent. Sarah froze. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat reverberating in her ears as adrenaline surged through her body. She knew the gravity of the situation. She had inadvertently placed herself between the mother and her cubs. Her mind raced through the bear safety protocols she had memorized. She slowly began to back away, careful not to make any sudden movements that could provoke the bear. But the mother bear had already spotted her. The bear's head snapped up, nostrils flaring as it caught Sarah's scent. The cubs were still oblivious to the presence of the intruder, but the mother's demeanor changed instantly. The calm graze turned into a focused, defensive posture. In one terrifying instant, the bear charged. There was no time to think, only to react. Sarah's instincts screamed for her to run, but she knew better. Running from a grizzly was futile. It could easily outrun her. Instead, she dropped to the ground and curled into a tight ball, her hands clasped behind her neck, knees tucked to her chest and head down. It was the only chance she had, the final card she could play in a desperate situation. The sound of the bear's paws thudding against the earth grew louder, and in seconds the bear was upon her. Sarah felt the earth tremble beneath the weight of the grizzly as it stopped mere inches from her. She forced herself to remain as still as possible, hoping, praying that the bear would lose interest, but that hope was shattered when the first heavy blow landed. The bear's paw swiped at her with terrifying force, sending a jolt of pain through her side. The sheer power behind the strike was overwhelming. It felt as though her ribs might crack from the impact. Then came the bite. The bear's teeth clamped down on her thigh, its jaws like a vice cutting through her running tights and skin with horrifying ease. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and all-consuming. She could feel the warmth of her blood soaking into the earth beneath her, but she didn't move. She couldn't. The only way to survive was to continue playing dead, no matter how much every fiber of her being screamed to fight or flee. The bear's assault was brutal but brief. After a few more moments of mauling, the mother grizzly seemed to decide that Sarah was no longer a threat. The bear released its grip on her and, with a huff, backed away. Sarah heard the bear's heavy breathing and felt the vibrations of its massive body as it lingered for a moment longer. Then, mercifully, the bear moved off, her cubs following obediently behind her. For what felt like an eternity, Sarah didn't move. She listened to the sounds of the forest, the fading rustle of the bear family as they disappeared into the brush. Her body trembled both from the pain and the shock. She had survived the initial attack, but her ordeal was far from over. Every breath she took sent sharp stabs of pain through her torso, and her leg throbbed with the deep puncture wounds from the bear's bite. She gingerly moved her hands to inspect the damage, wincing as her fingers grazed the torn flesh. Blood soaked her leg and pooled beneath her on the trail. She needed to stop the bleeding, but she had no supplies, no bandages, only her clothing. She ripped a section of her shirt and tied it tightly around her leg, improvising a makeshift tourniquet. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Then came the grim realization. She was still miles from the trailhead. Alone, injured, and leaving a trail of blood, she was far from safety. The thought of moving was agonizing, but staying put wasn't an option. The bear was still in the area, and the scent of her blood could attract more predators. With a deep, shuddering breath, Sarah forced herself to stand. The pain in her leg was excruciating, and every step sent a fresh wave of nausea through her. But she pushed forward, determined to survive. She hobbled along the trail, using the trees for support, each movement slow and deliberate. Her body screamed in protest, but her mind was focused on one goal: getting out alive. The hours dragged on as she painstakingly made her way down the trail, her vision swimming and her strength waning. She knew the blood loss was significant, and every step felt heavier than the last. The forest, once a place of solace and beauty, now felt like a hostile maze, each rustle of leaves a reminder that danger was never far away. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, Sarah pressed on. Her body was broken, her spirit battered, but she refused to give in. The bear had moved on, but she was still fighting for her life. Each agonizing step was a testament to her will to survive. Finally, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, she spotted the faint outline of the trailhead in the distance. Her body sagged with relief, but the struggle was not over. She still had to make it those last few 100 yards, through the pain and the blood loss, before she could even hope for help. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah pushed forward, her mind clinging to the thought of survival. The bear had spared her life once, but now it was up to her to utilize the opportunity. On September 17, 2024, Sergei Volkov, a veteran hunter, ventured deep into the vast Siberian wilderness near the Yenisei River. The 58-year-old had been hunting in these remote forests for over 3 decades, and this annual trip was a tradition for him. Born and raised in a small village in northern Siberia, Sergei learned hunting skills from his father and grandfather. He was known for his expertise in tracking wildlife, especially deer, and had always navigated the wild with confidence and ease. His trips were a chance for him to escape the noise of modern life and reconnect with nature, something he cherished deeply. Siberia was Sergei's second home, with its endless stretches of dense forest, harsh winters, and untamed beauty. This year, however, the wilderness had changed. Recent wildfires had swept through parts of the forest, displacing many animals, including predators like grizzly bears. Sergei knew the risks of encountering wildlife in such conditions, but he was prepared. He had his trusted rifle, a hunting knife, and a satellite phone, which he always carried in case of emergencies. Yet on this particular day, fate had other plans. Sergei spent the morning tracking a deer, moving silently through the forest. The air was crisp, and the ground beneath him was soft with fallen leaves. His keen eyes followed the subtle signs of movement, his years of experience guiding him. He was focused, his attention fully on the hunt, unaware of the danger lurking nearby. Unbeknownst to Sergei, a massive grizzly bear had wandered into the area, displaced by the wildfires. The bear, starving and aggressive, had been searching for food, driven into unfamiliar territory by the fires. It was a huge, powerful animal, capable of moving silently despite its size. The bear, now only yards away from Sergei, had been watching him for some time, its instincts triggered by hunger and the scent of the hunter's presence. Suddenly, the bear charged. With barely a sound, it closed the distance between them in seconds. Sergei didn't hear it coming until it was too late. He felt the force of the animal slams into him from behind, knocking him off his feet. The impact was overwhelming, and before Sergei could react, his rifle was thrown from his hands, landing several feet away. The weight of the grizzly bear pressed down on him, pinning him to the ground. Sergei struggled to breathe as the massive animal growled, its claws tearing into his back. Pain shot through his body as he desperately tried to reach for his knife, the only weapon left to defend himself. The bear's powerful jaws snapped near his head, and Sergei knew he had only seconds to act. Summoning all his strength, he managed to pull the knife from his belt and swung it toward the bear. The blade struck the bear's side, but the animal was undeterred. Its sheer size and power made Sergei's efforts seem almost futile. Pinned beneath the bear's crushing weight, Sergei fought with everything he had, his mind racing for a way to escape. The forest around them was silent except for the sound of the struggle, as the hunter fought for his life in the remote Siberian wilderness. Sergei's body was being crushed under the immense weight of the grizzly bear, its powerful claws ripping at his back. Every breath felt like a struggle, and the pain coursing through him was almost unbearable. He gripped his hunting knife tightly, knowing that it was the only thing standing between him and certain death. With every ounce of strength he had left, Sergei drove the knife into the bear's side again, aiming for a spot between its thick fur and muscle. The bear roared in pain, rearing back for a moment, but it wasn't enough to stop the attack. The bear, driven by hunger and instinct, pressed forward again. Sergei could feel his strength fading, his body weakening under the relentless weight. His mind raced as he tried to find a way out, but the bear's sheer size and power left him with few options. His satellite phone, which could have been his lifeline, had been knocked out of his jacket pocket during the struggle and was now lying useless in the dirt, its screen cracked and dark. The bear lunged once more, but Sergei managed to roll to the side, just out of reach of its massive claws. His back was bleeding and his muscles screamed in pain, but his instincts for survival pushed him onward. With the knife still in his hand, he struck the bear again, this time aiming for its neck. The bear recoiled, shaking its head in anger and pain. Sergei knew this might be his only chance to escape. Summoning what little energy he had left, Sergei scrambled to his feet, his legs weak and trembling beneath him. He was barely able to stand, but he forced himself to run, his vision blurring from exhaustion and pain. Behind him, the bear staggered for a moment, confused by the injuries Sergei had inflicted. Then, with one last growl, it turned and retreated into the trees, disappearing into the dense forest. Sergei collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. His body was covered in deep wounds, his clothing torn and soaked with blood. The wilderness around him was eerily quiet once more, as if the forest itself had been holding its breath during the attack. Sergei lay there for several minutes, too weak to move, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. He had survived the bear's attack, but he was critically injured and miles from the nearest village. With no working phone and no way to call for help, Sergei knew his only chance was to crawl to safety. He dragged himself slowly through the forest, his body protesting with every movement. The sun was beginning to set, and the cold Siberian night would soon descend upon him. He could feel his strength slipping away, but he kept moving, driven by a will to survive. In the days that followed, Sergei's disappearance led to a search by local villagers. They found him weak and barely alive, deep in the forest. He was rushed to the nearest hospital, where he received treatment for his severe injuries. Though he survived, the attack left him with lasting scars, both physical and emotional. The Siberian wilderness had always been his second home, but now he understood its dangers more deeply than ever before. The bear had been a reminder of nature's unpredictable power, and Sergei, though a seasoned hunter, knew that he would never venture into the wilderness again without a new respect for the creatures that called it home. June 15, 2019, Sarah Jennings, a skilled bush pilot, was flying over the vast Alaskan wilderness. For over a decade, she had been piloting small planes through some of the most remote regions of Alaska, delivering supplies and ferrying people to places unreachable by road. Born and raised in Anchorage, she had grown up around aircraft and wilderness survival. Her father had been a pilot, and from a young age, Sarah had developed the skills to navigate both the skies and the rugged terrain below. On this day, Sarah was flying solo, carrying emergency medical supplies to a remote village. The weather was clear, and she felt confident as she soared above the sprawling forests and snow-capped mountains. The Alaskan wilderness was beautiful but unforgiving. Miles of dense forest stretched below her with no signs of civilization. It was a landscape she knew well, but it was also one that demanded respect. Suddenly, her plane's engine sputtered. A deep rumble shook the aircraft as smoke began to rise from the engine. Sarah's heart raced as she realized her worst fear was coming true: engine failure. She quickly scanned the landscape for a safe place to land, but the dense trees and uneven terrain left her with few options. With no time to waste, Sarah wrestled with the controls, guiding the plane toward a small clearing in the forest. The impact was rough. The plane skidded across the ground, hitting rocks and trees before coming to a stop. When the dust settled, Sarah was bruised and shaken but alive. The wreckage of her plane lay scattered around her. Her leg throbbed with pain, likely injured in the crash, but she knew that sitting still wasn't an option. She was stranded miles from any sign of human life, with no way to call for help. Her radio had been destroyed in the crash, and her emergency beacon had been damaged. Sarah's training kicked in. She gathered what supplies she could from the wreckage: a small knife, some matches, and a few energy bars. With no time to lose, she began moving, limping through the thick forest, hoping to find water or a sign of a nearby village. The dense trees and heavy undergrowth made the journey difficult, and every step sent pain shooting up her leg. Hours passed as Sarah made slow progress through the wilderness. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The temperature dropped, and the reality of her situation began to sink in. But then, something worse happened. As she stopped to rest near a stream, Sarah noticed movement in the distance. A large brown bear was watching her from the trees. The scent of the crash had likely attracted the bear, and now it had found her. Sarah knew enough about bears to recognize the danger. This wasn't just a passing encounter. The bear was stalking her. It moved slowly, its eyes locked on her, sensing her vulnerability. With her heart pounding, Sarah realized she was in a deadly situation. The bear was hungry, and she was injured and alone. Her outdoor skills would now be tested in the most extreme way possible. As the large brown bear stepped out from the trees, Sarah's heart raced. She knew that in the remote wilderness of Alaska, miles from any help, this bear was now the greatest threat to her survival. The predator, likely drawn by the scent of the crash or her presence, was clearly focused on her. Sarah had read enough about bears to understand that once a bear starts following, it can be relentless, especially when food is scarce. Instinctively, Sarah backed away slowly, keeping her eyes on the bear, knowing sudden movements could provoke it to charge. Her injured leg made every step painful, but stopping wasn't an option. The bear took a few slow steps toward her, its large body moving with terrifying confidence. It was clear that this was no idle curiosity. The bear was following her with intent. Sarah looked around, trying to assess her options. The dense forest provided little room for escape, but she spotted a cluster of trees with low branches a few yards away. With her limited strength, climbing would be difficult. But it could be her only chance to put some distance between her and the bear. She limped toward the trees, her survival instincts pushing her forward even though her body was nearing exhaustion. Reaching the base of the tree, Sarah grabbed the lowest branch and pulled herself up. The pain in her leg was sharp, but adrenaline carried her through the effort. She climbed higher, her hands scraping against the rough bark, while the bear approached below. From her vantage point, she could see the bear circling the tree, sniffing the air and pawing at the ground. The bear stood on its hind legs, pressing its massive paws against the trunk of the tree. It was an intimidating sight, the bear's full size on display. The tree shook under its weight, but it held firm. Sarah clung tightly to the branches, hoping the bear would lose interest and move on. But the animal wasn't leaving. It stayed beneath her, waiting patiently as if it knew that time was on its side. Hours passed, and the sun began to set, casting a pale glow over the Alaskan wilderness. Sarah was cold, hungry, and weak from her injuries, but she knew she couldn't stay in the tree forever. The bear, still pacing beneath her, seemed determined. It would only be a matter of time before she'd need to move, and with her leg injured, running was out of the question. As night fell, Sarah made a plan. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small knife she had taken from the plane. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Using her remaining strength, she gathered branches and tied them together with bits of fabric from her jacket, creating a crude spear. She knew it wouldn't be enough to kill the bear, but it might give her a fighting chance if the animal attacked again. The night dragged on, with Sarah battling exhaustion and the freezing cold. She watched the bear through the darkness, its eyes reflecting the dim light of the moon. Eventually, as the hours wore on, the bear seemed to grow bored and wandered off into the forest. Sarah waited, making sure the coast was clear before climbing down from the tree. The aftermath of her encounter left her physically and emotionally drained. Though she had survived the night, she knew her journey was far from over. With her limited supplies and the harsh environment around her, Sarah still faced many challenges. However, she had overcome the most immediate threat, the stalking bear, and her determination to survive had only grown stronger. Several days later, after navigating the unforgiving terrain, Sarah was found by a rescue team sent after she failed to reach her destination. She was weak, injured, but alive. Her encounter with the bear left her with scars, both physical and mental, but it also reminded her of the fierce resilience she possessed. The Thompson family, consisting of David, Angela, and their teenage daughter Amy, had always loved their yearly summer vacation to Glacier National Park in Montana. This year, on June 12, 2024, marked their 5th visit to this remote paradise. They all deeply appreciated the peace and quiet that nature offers. Angela, a nurse, valued the respite from her taxing profession, while David, a high school history teacher, found serenity in the mountains. Even with her teenage angst, Amy enjoyed the freedom and adventure these trips provided. Glacier National Park was a refuge for people looking to get away from the stress of everyday life, with its untamed woods, rocky mountains, and valleys sculpted by glaciers. The Thompsons' cabin was situated miles away from the closest town, deep in this remote wilderness. With its wraparound porch and rustic wooden construction, the cabin was perfect for those who wanted to relish the breathtaking views of the surroundings. It was the kind of place that always offered warmth. Simply put, the cabin was inviting with its large stone fireplace, comfortable furniture, and walls, which were decorated with pictures and maps from their past travels. The family usually spent their summer vacation hiking, fishing, reading on the porch, or simply relaxing. David, being a history teacher, loved to tell Angela and Amy stories about the park's past and the Native American tribes that used to live there. Amy saw the family's annual summer vacation as an opportunity to practice her drawing skills. She would often spend long hours sketching the breathtaking views. At the same time, her mother, Angela, took pictures of the various flowers and animals they encountered. The vacation was a success, or so they believed, but it all changed on the 3rd evening of their vacation. That evening, the Thompsons decided dinner on the porch would be nice. They wanted to enjoy the cool breeze and the sounds of the forest as darkness embraced the park. The sun was still out but setting, casting a golden hue over the landscape. David had had a lot of luck fishing that afternoon. As such, they had plenty of fish for dinner. David and Angela grilled the fish together while Amy prepared the vegetables. They were all in a good mood, laughing and joking around. They were also dreading the end of their vacation, but their spirits were high for the most part. They even decided to come to the cabin again for their winter vacation and invite some friends too. About an hour they were just finishing their meal when Amy noticed something moving in the shadows of the nearby trees. She was the only one facing the forest. She quickly darted her eyes to her father and told David to look towards the forest. The man squinted, trying to figure out what it was that he was seeing. But it didn't take long for the Thompsons to make out the shape. Suddenly, a massive grizzly bear, wild with hunger, emerged from the trees. Its beady eyes were fixed on the family. It was a chilling sight. For a second, Amy thought that was the stare of an ancient beast. The teenager wasn't too far from the truth. Driven into human territory by the scarcity of natural food sources, the bear was dangerously hungry and aggressive. Angela was just about to tell her family to run inside the cabin, but the bear was faster. The animal charged, covering the distance to the porch and the terrified family in mere seconds. David acted out of instinct, grabbing a nearby chair to use as a makeshift weapon. He knew their best shot, and it was a slim shot anyway, was to fight and hope to fool the bear into thinking the fight wasn't worth it. In the meantime, he told Angela to get Amy inside, his voice trembling with fear. Angela pulled Amy towards the cabin door, but they moved too slowly. The bear was simply too fast. With a powerful swipe of its massive paw, the bear knocked David to the ground. David quickly regained his strength and resolve. He swung the chair with all his might, but it was no use against the bear's terrifying strength. Angela screamed in terror as she looked around herself, searching for something to fend off the beast. She grabbed a cast-iron skillet from the table and swung it at the bear, hitting it on the head. The bear roared in pain and stumbled for a moment, but was ultimately undeterred. The animal was in a frenzy, completely driven by hunger and rage. Amy was standing somewhat close to the cabin door, but she was frozen with fear, watching as the bear mauled her father. The sound of David's cries of pain pierced the evening air and shattered any last shred of hope Amy felt up until then. Desperate to save her husband, Angela continued to strike the bear, but it was like trying to stop a freight train with a feather. The bear turned its attention to Angela, swatting her away with terrifying force. She hit the ground hard, the skillet slipping from her grasp. Angela heard a nauseating sound, the sound of her skull cracking upon impact. Bloodied and bruised, she tried to crawl towards Amy, who was sobbing uncontrollably. She pleaded with her daughter to run, her voice merely a whisper. Amy, her heart pounding, turned and fled into the cabin, slamming the door behind her. She could hear the sounds of the struggle outside, her parents' cries mingling with the bear's roars. She searched for something, anything to defend herself. Grabbing a hunting knife from the kitchen, she stood by the door, trembling and praying for a miracle. Outside, the fight was over. David and Angela's lifeless bodies lay on the blood-stained porch. They were gone. But the bear's bloodthirst was far from sated. It began to sniff around the cabin, drawn by the scent of Amy inside. Amy instinctively knew her parents were dead, and she feared she was next. She backed away from the door, holding the knife in front of her. If only she could reach the phone in time, and maybe then she could barricade herself in one of the rooms. As her mind raced, Amy didn't realize a crucial mistake she had made. She had forgotten to lock the door behind her. In an instant, the door swung open and the bear charged inside the cabin. Amy screamed, slashing at the bear with the knife, but all her attempts were futile. The blade barely penetrated the bear's thick, matted fur. The bear's jaws closed around Amy's neck, silencing her cries. In an instant, she was dead. The whole attack lasted 3 minutes. The Thompsons never stood a chance. 2 days later, Jim, a family friend who had a cabin of his own in the park, decided to pay them a quick visit. He was concerned by their uncharacteristic silence. The sight that greeted him was one of unimaginable horror. The once cozy cabin was now a scene of carnage. The porch and interior stained with blood. The bodies of David, Angela, and Amy lay where they had fallen. The devastating loss of the Thompson family stunned everyone in their community. Friends and family were inconsolable, finding it difficult to accept the senseless and terrible death. The event brought up important issues about the management of animals and the growing threat posed by hungry predators. The tragic tale of the Thompson family's last moments served as a sobering reminder of the fragile balance that exists between humans and nature, a balance that can be upset and, as such, result in unimaginable disaster.